at the United Nations. Thoughts?
Well, it was a pastiche of his golden oldies in one sense. First of all, there's the usual progressive invocation of history, which is a proper noun to progressives, and the fact that everyone better get on board on the right side of history. That is, he knows the right side of history, and history's going to work out, which makes you wonder what all the urgency's about if history's going to work out the right way anyway. Then, something that I'd love to hear how Putin responds to this. While small gains can be won at the barrel of a gun, they will ultimately be turned back if enough voices support the freedom of nations. So it's voices against guns, and I'm betting on the guns, and I'll bet Putin is also. Then he lectures the Israelis on their need to understand the hard work of peace. This is a country that hasn't known an hour of peace in 66 years. And then he seems to have a metabolic urge to remind us and the rest of the world of something that no one doubts, which is that America has flaws. He says Islamic State decapitates and crucifies and murders husbands and sells their wives, but we had Ferguson, Missouri.
How about that? Let's listen to that soundbite about Ferguson.
In a summer marked by instability in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, I know the world also took notice of the small American city of Ferguson, Missouri, where a young man was killed and a community was divided. So yes, we have our own racial and ethnic tensions.
Mara, the White House came back to the press pool and said they wanted to clarify that he was just pointing out America is not perfect. That doesn't usually happen when they come back to the press pool.
No, I don't think he was making a moral equivalence between ISIS and Ferguson. However, it sounds like they understood this could have been prone to misinterpretation. I think that when he's being pretty tough on the world, I took away some other things out of this speech. Tough on Saudi Arabia, saying, look, you fostered this ideology, you have to stop that. And, you're in the global economy, you make a lot of money from it, can't fund these extremist fundamentalist preachers who give rise to ISIS. But the president always, when he speaks to an international audience, is self-critical because, I think that's the way he thinks he can appeal to that audience.
Being humble in front of world leaders. There may be some world leaders, I don't know, who didn't know what Ferguson, Missouri was, maybe not, but...
Well, it surely wasn't taken out of context, and he intended a moral equivalence. I'll read you what he said. In a summer marked by instability in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe, I know the world also took notice of Ferguson. That is, as George said, we have people who slit throats on television, take their heads off in some places. We have countries that invade their neighbors. More people, incidentally, have been killed in eastern Ukraine than died in the Gaza war. No one knows that. A lot of death. But on the other hand, we have a shooting in Missouri still unresolved. Nobody's been charged yet. And thus, everybody ought to know this is a continuation of the apology tour or the confession tour, which took place. At least the one thing you can say about the improvement in Obama's treatment of his own country is that 6 years ago he went around the world talking about our sins, and here at least he stayed home and did it from the podium of the United Nations. The other thing that was unremarked about this speech was this is the weakest statement ever issued on Iran and nukes. We no longer hear Iran cannot possess nukes. We're not going to allow this, will not happen. He says we're in negotiations. Iran has an opportunity to rejoin the community of nations. This can only happen if Iran takes this historic opportunity. In other words, Iran will decide if it wants to go nuclear. No threats. Forget about saying everything's on the table. He doesn't even talk about sanctions, which are collapsing. This week, a Chinese ship docked in an Iranian port so they could have joint naval exercises, and they are still talking about how Iran is so isolated. This is a surrender on Iran as our negotiations are reaching a deadline within a month.
Marty, the White House pushes back hard when they say linking the ISIS coalition to the Iran talks. But they are happening simultaneously, and there is this concern
they
that
are
there's
happening simultaneously, yes, and there's been a lot of speculation about how they're going to affect each other. Does Iran think that if it participates or helps in some way with intelligence in the fight against ISIS, can it get a better deal? I don't see how that could happen. I mean, the goal of the Iran talks is to dismantle Iran's nuclear program. I don't see how they could possibly do anything for the U.S. that would cause us to sign something that allows them to keep it. I don't think that would fly at all. I think the stuff in the speech that was important was the talk about ISIS. Whether he came reluctantly to this fight or not, this president is now a war president, and this is what's going to dominate the remaining 2 years of his presidency.
Well, with regard to Iran, in Kissinger's new book, he says in 2003, when these negotiations began, Iran had 130 centrifuges. Now they have 19,000. 10,000 only in service, but 19,000. When these began in 2003, they had no capacity to enrich uranium. Now they have 7 tons of low-enriched uranium and can, in a matter of months, using their centrifuges, make it weapons grade. So whatever we're doing is not, it seems to me, visibly interfering with Iran.
And even worse, of the 19,000 centrifuges that the Iranians possess, they are demanding in the negotiations the right to go to 190,000. And our brilliant riposte, this is the newest idea for restraining them, is to let them keep as many as they want, but to remove the pipes that connect them. Because if you can't move the uranium from one machine to another, you're not going to enrich. So what I'm going to do is a plumbing change, which could be reversed in a week, with a wrench and a screwdriver, and that's going to be our answer on how to save face for the Iranians. This is a surrender in progress, and because of the ISIS crisis, no one is noticing.
Meantime, a new face we learned about today, the team leader for the United Arab Emirates F-16s was Major Mariam Mansouri, the first female fighter pilot in the UAE. Kind of sends its own signal, Mara.
Yep, it does. And, there are 5 Arab nations that are in this coalition. And today, the British decided that they were going to take a vote in Parliament to actually participate in airstrikes. So it'll be France and Great Britain in addition to us. I think the president, is moving forward in a way that the American people want him to. They don't want him to occupy any more countries, but they want him to do something about ISIS, and he's going to have to succeed at that. That's going to be the test for him in the next 2 years.
Meanwhile, quickly, speaking of France, ISIS had its own response in the beheading of a French journalist.
And France will be properly undeterred by that. You cannot have barbarism dictate your foreign policy.
But remember, we had the shooting of a young man in Ferguson, so we mustn't be judgmental.
Next up, the panelists.